You're listening to The Extraction, conversations on the systems and strategies behind dental practice growth with Colin Ambler and Kyle Bergman. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Extraction. Your co-host here, Kyle, along with my co-host, co-founder, and CEO at TeamCare, Colin. And today we have a very special guest. We're joined by Dr. Ruth Manschreck, dentist, business strategist, founder of Shoreline Strategies, and the host of the Team-Led Business Success podcast. Really excited to chat with Ruth because she has a really powerful story about what she did with a lot of business owners, starting with herself. And one of the things that we're going to talk about today is how to get practice owners and operators out of the chair more. Ruth, Dr. Ruth, thank you so much for joining us. How are you today?
Wonderful. Thank you. Kyle, it's great to be here. I'm looking forward to talking with your listeners.
Yes, and I know that they're going to get a lot of value from hearing what you have to say. So let's start at the beginning. What inspired you to want to go into dentistry, and then you had success as a dentist, and what inspired you to take that next leap into consultant, advisor? Love to hear all of it.
So when I was in college, I volunteered at a clinic on weekends. A dentist would come in and volunteer his time, and the poor man had these gigantic hands and he frightened the children. And I thought, boy, I could get away with a whole lot more than this guy is just because of who I am. And I'm good with my hands. So that sort of started me. I switched majors and took off like that. I then started, after school, I started my own practice from scratch. I was working 5 days a week. My husband and I had 2 little boys. Things were humming along great. And my daughter was born. She had a very traumatic birth, was in the hospital for weeks. When she came home, she had to see 8 different doctors every week. So life had to change. We took my practice from 5 full days down to 2.5, and took some doing, but we did it. And I always want to say that my team and I did it. We did it together. It's a lot of trial and error, but we got it. And then we got back up to the revenue that we had before she was born. And then we grew from there. So we actually never went back to 5 full days a week. We just kept the 2.5 days. And the doc in the suite next to me in our building stopped me in the hall one day and he goes, "Ruth, what are you doing? You're never here. Your patients come and go. Your office is still up and running. How are you doing this?" And he actually became my first client when I taught him what we did. And now I've expanded that because as an industry, dentistry is blessed with practice management people who can teach you all the things about how to run your practice better, more efficiently, more streamlined. But other professions aren't that blessed. So a lot of my clients are actually CPAs, attorneys, chiropractors. But we have the same value-driven culture, practice, team members. The language is very, very similar. So that's how I got started. And I basically teach. Most practitioners don't want to cut their hours in half, but if they say take 10 hours out of their week, what a joy would that be to have 10 hours back, whether you want to spend those extra 10 at the chair or with your family or traveling or any of those things that we very heroically hang up on the wall when we decide to have our own practice. And I think it's time that dental professionals get their time back.
Amen. So the work less, make more foundation that really drives what you do, you kind of stumbled on in a really traumatic way. And I guess the silver lining there is that you uncovered that you are able to, in fact, work less and make more. You have a program called Business Lifestyle by Design. What does that phrase really mean in the context of dentistry?
In the beginning, when we start out in practice, we're so used to molding our lifestyle around what it takes for the practice to get off the ground, to get going, to grow. And we forget that the practice is actually there to support our lifestyle. And so we take all of running a practice and divide it up into 5 areas, so to speak, 5 steps that you need to look at, because a lot of times it's not that we as docs are not good at delegating or we're not efficient with our time. We don't need time management hacks. What we need is a practice that runs itself without constant input from us. And that's what I help people design.
Okay, so Ruth, I have a question, and if you haven't traced my whole history in life, which I don't expect you did, my wife is a dentist, and I am the business arm of that. And we grew a practice from scratch and have 7 associates. And one of that was somewhat essential for us, and it was an alternative to my wife getting out of the chair by cutting her hours and practice not being open. It was a way to cut her hours while also having the practice to be open and to
Right.
be a bigger business. Tell me a little bit about your core sauce, your secret sauce here, and if it involves adding associates or not, or sometimes it does, but you've been very successful with this. You teach it. Give us a little idea what the process is about. I think you said there's 5 aspects, but I'd love to know
Sure.
a little bit more just about how the mechanics of it.
Yep. It starts with the systems, the process, and the most important of which I call your patient journey. So from the moment, the first phone call, what happens? What do you ask? What's the language? Who does it? And most importantly, what do you want the potential patient to feel at the end of that call? Hugely important. And then the next step, the handoff. Who gets it next? How does it get scheduled? How does the examination happen? How does treatment planning happen? How is delivery? And then how is follow up done? So, all those steps all along the way, that's the first, is to map out that entire process so that anybody can jump in anywhere and make things work. But best of all, know what information do you start with at the beginning of the step and what communication has to happen as you hand off the patient to the next person in that line. And so that's the first step. The second one is the communication that makes those processes work. Everything from your patient journey to how you collect your accounts receivable, all of those things. What's the communication that has to happen? Communication doesn't mean more meetings. I'm not a big fan of meetings. We have the 10-minute standing huddle every morning, figure out what today looks like, where are the holes, who needs extra help, look at tomorrow, what is that? A lot of industries don't even have that basic of a setup. But more importantly, I think, are the steps of each process, the communication that has to happen. Dentistry, like any industry, tends to develop silos where the insurance people don't always talk to the scheduling people, don't always talk to back of the house. So how do all those people communicate? And a huge part of that is our software that we use and how we use that, how we train each other to use that. The next piece is your team. Your team is the biggest asset you have, and how you care for them, how you grow them. Many companies, maybe practices, call them performance reviews. I like to think of them as growth conferences. If you join my team, you will be a different person when you leave my team, because we've done everything we can to grow you as a chairside, as an administrator, as a technician, but also as just a basic human being. What have we done to make this person a better person for having been part of our team? Because think about it. If you think of your practice as a brand, the people that are on your team are a living part of your brand. And as you send them out into the world, they are representing you out there, even after they leave your practice. That's a huge
Totally.
part.
I think it's totally understated too about the
Mhm.
power of the referral traffic that comes from word of mouth and your patients having a great experience. I think dentistry is such a trust game where it's like, who do you go to the dentist for? Everyone asks that because there's such like a fear around it. And so I've totally experienced that where there's all sorts of marketing activities, but tried and true is give a great experience and the patients will be some of the best marketing.
When I first started my practice, I thought, kind of woe is me. People hate coming here and they're always stressed out and in pain when they get here. I have a mess to work with. And now I feel like, thank God, people come to me when they're anxious, hair on fire, I'm in pain, I don't like you. All of that because the transformation that happens at the front desk, in the back of the house, on their way out in the parking lot as they're looking at my work in their rear view mirror, I have this marvelous opportunity to show a giant transformation, not just a little one. It's not like picking up your mail at the post office. This is a big deal, and it's one that people talk about. We are so blessed to help people go through that whole transformation. That's our marketing. You're absolutely right. That is the gist of how we do things.
Dr. Ruth, you touched on something that I want to underscore because I think it's really powerful. I guess it was maybe a few things. I also dislike meetings a lot. You could almost go as far as to say that I hate meetings. Big fan of Loom. And what's interesting, and I think it's industry agnostic, but sometimes you will find someone who is stuck. They have a problem and they're trying to reach out and they can't get in touch with the person that they think has the solution. And then they inevitably figure out the solution on their own. But if they had been able to get in touch with that person would have showed them, and they're therefore kind of dumber in that alternate reality. But because they had to figure it out themselves. And so going back to what led you into this incredible role as an advisor to other owners was a constraint, a real world constraint where you had to figure it out. And by not having meetings, you could almost put arbitrary constraints on a business, regardless of whether it's dentistry. And people are going to have to get smarter or they're going to die. And so that's something really interesting. I'm going to segue that into this question that I have for you. A lot of people are looking for a quick fix. Certainly our listeners are no exception, as are we all. And there's the concept that, Pareto's principle, everyone's familiar with that, the 80-20 rule. What's the 20% of the things that could have 80% of the impact? But if you take 80% of the 80-20 rule, you get the 64 and 4. What are the 4% of things that could have 64% of a positive outcome? And so for you, what's like that thing? What, if there's one number, one KPI that a business owner should watch to know whether their business is getting healthier or going in the right direction, what would that be?
I would say I'm totally not a KPI person per se, because so much of what I watch is human interaction.
Hmm.
I would say the temperature, the atmosphere. You had a guest on recently who said that some offices are run on personality instead of process, which I thought was a brilliant observation. Very, very true. And when you walk into your office and everyone is walking on eggshells, docs kind of miss that sometimes. I'm aware, and I own up to it, and I've apologized my whole life for being like that. But that atmosphere, I have a hard time putting a KPI on that. It does eventually show up in your KPIs, sure, but there's so much you can do ahead of time by paying attention. And I'll be the first to say that dentists, as CEOs, we all want to do it a different way. And some of us don't want to be a CEO at all. I say, in my world, I get to be whatever kind of CEO I want to be. But certain activities have to happen. Doesn't mean the doc has to do it, but someone has to be responsible for the climate, the temperature of your culture. Somebody has to be looking out for that part. Doesn't have to be the doc, but somebody needs to keep their finger on the pulse of what's going on, because your patients know when they walk in the door, they know exactly what the attitude is in your culture. So somebody on our side of the desk has to be paying attention just to that.
What you're talking about, this intuition, the climate of a practice, is that something that you developed or something that you feel like kind of a God-given talent that you had?
No, totally developed. I think a lot of my style of being a coach and a mentor is based on all the mistakes I made when I was practicing. I once walked up to the front desk and stood behind my office manager, and there was perspiration running down the back of her neck. And I went around to the front of her and I said, "What's wrong?" And she burst into tears. I had missed so much that was going on in the office. I had no idea. I was back in the lab doing things, I learned how to take temperatures because I'm so bad at being aware of all of that while I'm focused on practicing dentistry,
Mm-hmm.
So to talk about KPIs, there's leading and there's lagging. We like to talk about leading ones because those are exciting. We like to talk about lagging ones. I said it backwards. We like to talk about lagging ones because they're exciting. It's your revenue, but we should be talking about the leading ones, which are boring and quiet and no one notices.
I love that, Dr. Ruth. And I think that there's a group you may have listened, Corey Schobel. He's a good friend of mine, and he's a fellow Michigan guy. He's very well known, I think, out there. I've been around traveling with him. And I think there's a lot of consultants and coaches in the business that tend to look at numbers, and numbers are valuable. But one of the things that is still part of Corey's repertoire, and it seems like yours the same, is that there's a little bit of an old school, like boots on the ground. I got to come in there and I got to feel what's going on in the practice. And I cannot talk about that enough. I've experienced it also. I've been in a couple hundred practices, and it's like I can look at their dashboards from afar, and I can get on a Zoom call with them, and I can ask them questions and how they're doing. But once I step foot into that office, it gives me a whole different picture. How the bathroom is kept, how the staff feels, what's the energy in there, what are the operatories like? And I think that everyone wants to chase, the easy fix. And I think that what you're talking about is a really good reminder for all of us that it's back to basics, and you got to have a great feel for it, because that's really what your patients make a decision on too. And it's like everyone needs to be focused on that. I think it's awesome to have you and just give us that reminder, because it's easy to go tech focused, and I know from running a practice, it's exactly what is the stuff
Mm-hmm.
you're talking about.
Yep. The sexy stuff is all about that dashboard. But we did touch on the next part of a practice that I like to focus on, which is the culture. What so many times I go into an office and they have core values beautifully engraved on a plaque up on the wall, and no one ever talks about them. No one does anything with them. And that's a huge waste of energy, which is something you need definitely spread through your practice. So we teach clients to take those core values. The problem is they're not tangible. They're big words. Nobody knows exactly what you mean. So we take those core values and we turn them into tangible behaviors so that a team knows when I'm doing this, I'm living in front, I'm role modeling this core value of our practice. And it's something I had to learn how to do, and it's something we taught our team how to do again and again and again, because behavior and core values evaporate when you stop talking about them. As part of leading your team is reminding them of your core values and what they look like in action. And I actually learned the best example I have of a company that turned their core values into living behaviors was a manufacturing firm that I found. And they had 6 core values and 30 core behaviors. It was kind of like a code of conduct. And these were things that they even had a contest for employees to catch each other living their values out loud, role playing these behaviors in front of customers, in front of clients, in front of each other. But what a great way to get your team to focus on this is what this value looks like in action, so that your patients see this happening. And there's just nothing better than action to get the point across. Way, way better than words.
Amen. And it makes a lot of sense what you're talking about when it comes to behavior change, and talk is cheap and you have to walk the walk. One of the things you said earlier, which is really interesting as a litmus test, I think, for hiring folks, is you said, hey, if you're going to work with me, you are going to change. And for a lot of people, that's a very unattractive thing to say. And so if people accept that, then you could presume that they have a growth mindset. And that's someone that you absolutely want to work with. Wrapping up here, Dr. Ruth, one last practical takeaway I'd love for you to share with our listeners for the owner who wants to reach that promised land, the holy grail, whether completely out of the chair or at least working less, making more, but they feel trapped right now. For that owner who feels trapped in the practice, what is the first mindset shift you want them to make?
I would say the first one I did it was to not try to figure it out on my own, but to work with my team. I didn't try to come in and say, okay, I have it figured out. We're going to do this to make it right. I worked with my team. It's so important to bring them in. They are the heart and soul of your practice. Their perspective is different than the doc's. They see your patients from a different point of view. They have different conversations. They are so integral to your practice. And I think when you ask for your team members' opinion, you've just said to them, your opinion matters. You matter. I understand you have a brain and I actually want you to use it to do something more than make me a temporary. There's so much good that comes from saying, let's do this together. Let's work it out and figure out what do we need to do. Let's test. Let's experiment. See what happens. Keep track.
Awesome. Awesome. Don't do it alone. Ask for
Right.
help. Ask for your team. I love it. If you're picking up what Dr. Ruth is putting down, I'm sure I speak for her when she said she would love to speak with you. ShorelineStrategies.com. We'll include it in the shore notes if you want to reach out. Dr. Ruth, thank you so much for joining us. It was a pleasure having you, and it's just a wealth of knowledge. So congratulations on everything that you've done and continue to do, helping practices and owners work less and make more.
Thank you. It was great to be here. I appreciate it.
Dr. Ruth, awesome stuff. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, take care.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to The Extraction with Colin Ambler and Kyle Bergman. Read episode notes and transcripts at teamcaredental.com.